My mom paid for my $34,000 wedding as a gift, but 2 days after my honeymoon, she sent me a bill. Then I discovered her 20-year pattern and left them with nothing. I'm 28 years old. I work as a software engineer, and what my parents did to me 2 days after my wedding basically ended whatever relationship I could have had with them. I guess I should start from the beginning because this wasn't just an isolated incident. You know? It was more like the straw that broke the camel's back after a lifetime of accumulated shit. I grew up with my sister Catherine, who's 4 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she was always the favorite. I'm not exaggerating or being dramatic. It was obvious to everyone. When she wanted ballet classes, she got them. When I asked for the same thing, my parents said there wasn't budget for it. Catherine went to a super expensive private university, and they paid for everything, dorm included, and a new car. When my turn came, they told me there were scholarships available and I should apply, that they could help with something, but I needed to be more independent. Like, seriously? I was 18 and they were basically telling me to figure it out on my own while Catherine had been given everything on a silver platter. To be honest, at that moment I didn't process it as something so serious. I mean, I was angry, sure, but I thought maybe it was because Catherine was the oldest, or because my parents had more financial stability when she was young. I don't know. I made up excuses in my head. I left home at 16 to live with a friend because the environment at home was unbearable. Everything always revolved around Catherine and her achievements, and I was like another piece of furniture. I got a part-time job, finished high school, got a full scholarship to college because my grades were excellent, and basically built my life from scratch without anyone's help. I met Christopher in college, in my second year. He was studying mechanical engineering and was, I don't know how to explain it, the first person who really saw me. You know what I mean? Not as Catherine's younger sister, or as the problem daughter who left home, but as Megan. We started dating like 6 months after meeting, and we've been together ever since. He knew my whole family history, had seen how my parents treated me at the few gatherings we went to, and he always supported me when I had doubts about whether I was exaggerating things or not. Fast forward to like 3 years ago, Catherine married a guy who works in finance. The wedding was ridiculously luxurious. Like there was a budget of I don't know how many thousands of dollars, destination in Europe. Everything paid by my parents, obviously. I was a bridesmaid because Catherine insisted, even though our relationship had never been very close. She was always the star, and I was the one applauding from the shadows. At the wedding, my father gave a super emotional speech about how proud he was of his eldest daughter and how nothing was too much for her. I remember Christopher squeezed my hand during the entire speech because he knew I was holding back from crying. What happened next was even worse. Like a month after the wedding, Catherine and her husband bought a house. Like a huge house in a super expensive neighborhood. I thought maybe they had saved a lot or her husband made a fortune, but then my mother called me all excited to tell me they had given them $400,000 as a wedding gift for the house. $400,000? You read that right. When she told me, I was literally speechless. I asked her if she was joking and she laughed and said, "No, Megan. Your father and I wanted to make sure Catherine had a good start in her marriage." I hung up the phone and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Christopher came home and found me a mess on the couch. I told him and he was just as furious as me. But he told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Megan, you don't need anything from them. You already built your life without their help and you're amazing. That says more about you than about them." And he was right. But it still hurt, you know? It hurt like hell, knowing that to my parents I simply wasn't worth the same as Catherine. So, like a year after that, Christopher proposed to me. It was perfect. Nothing ostentatious. Just the two of us on a hike we did often, with a beautiful view of the city. Obviously, I said yes. When I told my parents, I expected a lukewarm reaction as always, but to my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy. My mother even cried a little and said she was happy for me. My father hugged me and said Christopher was a good man. Like, it was weird but nice. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe they cared even just a little bit. We started planning the wedding, and from the beginning, Christopher and I were clear that we wanted something simple, and we would pay for it ourselves. We had saved like $36,000 between the two of us, and that was our budget. Nothing exotic destinations or luxury venues, just a nice ceremony with our friends and close family, a pleasant reception, and that's it. We were checking out places and doing the math when my mother called and asked how much we were planning to spend. I told her around $36,000, and there was silence on the other end. Then she said, "Megan, your father and I want to pay for your wedding. All of it. We don't want you and Christopher to spend your savings on this." I froze. I asked her if she was sure, and she said yes, that it was the least they could do, that I was their daughter and they wanted to give me a beautiful wedding. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was super excited because it meant we could use our savings for other things, maybe a down payment on a house. And another part of me was suspicious because, you know, my whole life I had been the forgotten daughter. Christopher wasn't very convinced either. He told me, "Are you sure you want them to pay? What if there are conditions or something?" But I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, my parents were finally treating me like they treated Catherine. I wanted to believe things had changed. So I accepted. My mother was happy, started helping me with all the plans, went with me to see venues, taste food, pick flowers. It was like being in an alternate reality where I had a mother who really cared about me. The wedding was beautiful, honestly. We ended up spending like $34,000 because my parents didn't want to skimp on anything. The venue was gorgeous, the food delicious, there were flowers everywhere, a professional photographer, live music, everything. My father walked me down the aisle and even shed some tears, and my mother didn't stop smiling all night. Catherine was there with her husband, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we could be a normal family. Christopher and I danced our song, and I remember thinking, this is perfect. I finally have everything I wanted. The honeymoon was a week at a beach. Nothing luxurious but perfect for us. We came back to our apartment completely happy and relaxed, ready to start our married life. That was a Saturday. Monday morning, 2 days after returning, I checked the mail and there was an envelope from my parents. I thought maybe it was a congratulations card or something. I opened it. It was an invoice. An itemized invoice of absolutely everything they had spent on the wedding. Every damn thing. The venue, $12,000. Catering, $8,500. Locks, flowers, $2,300. Locks, photography, $4,200. And music, $3,800. Even the invitations and centerpieces. The total was $34,445.89. At the top, there was a handwritten note from my father that said, "Megan, please send a check for this amount to our address. We expect to receive it within the next 2 weeks." I sat on the kitchen floor with that paper in my hands and couldn't process what I was seeing. Christopher came out of the shower and found me there, reading and rereading that invoice as if it was going to change somehow. I showed him the paper and he went pale. He said, "Is this real? Is this a joke?" But it wasn't. It was completely real. My parents had billed me for my own wedding after saying it was a gift. I cried like I hadn't cried in my entire life. It wasn't even about the money. I mean, yes, it was $34,000 we hadn't planned to spend, but it was more than that. It was the humiliation, the betrayal, realizing that even when I thought they finally saw me like Catherine, turns out no. That everything had been a lie. Christopher was furious, wanted to call them immediately and tell them everything. But I asked him not to, that I needed time to think. I spent 2 days basically in shock. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just went around in circles in my head trying to understand what had happened. Why? Why do this to me? Why not tell me from the beginning that they expected me to pay them? At least I could have made an informed decision. But no. They decided to make me believe it was a gift, and then send me an invoice like it was just any business transaction. Finally, I decided I was going to pay the invoice, but after that I didn't want to know anything about them. I told Christopher and he completely supported me. We wrote a check for $34,445.89, and along with the check I put a letter. It wasn't long. It just said something like, "Here is the full payment for my wedding. Thanks for letting me know exactly how little I'm worth to you. You won't hear from me again." I sent the envelope and blocked their numbers, their emails, everything. I thought that would be the end, that I'd pay them and they'd leave me alone. But oh no, that would have been too easy. Like a week later, the messages started. First from my aunt, my mother's sister, telling me I was ungrateful, that my parents had done so much for me, and I responded with coldness. Then my cousin. Then other relatives I didn't even know well. Everyone basically saying the same shit. That I was horrible, that I didn't value my parents, that I should be grateful they had given me such a nice wedding. I was getting like 10 messages a day from people who clearly only knew my parents' version. Catherine also wrote me a long message about how I had always been selfish and how mom and dad were devastated. I responded with just one line. Did they charge you for the $400,000 they gave you? And she left me on read. I blocked everyone who was harassing me and basically isolated myself from my entire extended family. Like, 2 weeks after sending the check, I received an email from my mother. I saw it in my spam because I had blocked her main address, but apparently she had another one. The email was long and super manipulative. It said I had misinterpreted everything, that the invoice had been a life lesson to teach me the value of money and responsibility, that they never expected me to actually pay them, that they had planned to give me $100,000 as a wedding gift, more than what they gave Catherine considering inflation, but they wanted to wait for me to mature and learn to appreciate things. I read that email like 5 times trying to understand the twisted logic behind it. A life lesson? Seriously? What kind of psychopath invoices their daughter's wedding as a life lesson? And then saying they were going to give me more than Catherine. Like, did they expect me to believe that? The email ended saying the check was saved, that they hadn't deposited it, and they wanted me to come to their house to talk and work things out. Christopher read the email and said, "It's a trap. Don't go. Don't believe them anything." And I knew he was right. But there was a part of me, that stupid part that still wanted to have parents who loved me, that thought, what if it's true? What if they really planned to give me that money, and I ruined everything by reacting badly? But then I remembered my whole life. Every time they made me feel less than Catherine, every broken promise, and I knew Christopher was right. I responded to the email, basically telling them that if they never wanted me to pay them, then why send an invoice? Why put a 2-week deadline? Why make it seem so serious and official? And that if they really had $100,000 to give me, great. Transfer it to me, and then we'd talk. Like, if you're not lying, then prove it, right? But obviously I knew they were lying. What happened next was even crazier. My mother responded like 3 hours later, saying that due to my attitude and lack of respect, they were no longer going to give me anything. But if I wanted, I could deposit the check I had sent them. She literally said, "The check is still in your name, you can deposit it if you need the money so desperately." It was like a test or something, like they were waiting to see what I would do. And you know what? I took a picture of that email, went to the bank, and deposited the check through my phone right then and there. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me reject the money out of pride. It was my $34,000 that I had earned with my work, and if they wanted to play stupid games, I was going to get my money back. The check processed the next day without problems. Like 2 days later, on a Sunday morning, someone was banging on our apartment door like crazy. Christopher went to look through the peephole, and it was Catherine. She was screaming from the hallway, "Megan, open the door. I need to talk to you now." We didn't open. She stayed there like 20 minutes, yelling things about how I had ruined our family, how mom was crying all the time, how dad was considering disinheriting me. Eventually, she left when a neighbor threatened to call security. That same afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something told me to do it. It was my uncle, my father's brother, with whom I had almost no relationship. He told me he needed to tell me something and asked if he could talk. I said yes. He told me that like 20 years ago, when he got married, my parents did exactly the same thing to him. They offered to pay for his wedding, he accepted, and then they sent him an invoice. When he complained, they told him it was a lesson about financial responsibility in marriage. My uncle told me that he cut contact with my parents for like 10 years after that they eventually reconciled, but the relationship was never the same. He told me that when he found out what they had done to me, he felt horrible for not warning me before, but he thought maybe they had changed over the years. Obviously, they hadn't changed at all. It was their pattern, their way of maintaining control and feeling superior. He told me to do whatever I needed to do to be okay, that I didn't owe them anything. After talking to my uncle, everything clicked. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't because I was less valuable than Catherine. It was because my parents were toxic people who used money to manipulate and control. Catherine had never had to pay for anything because she had always done exactly what they wanted, never questioned anything. She was the perfect and obedient daughter. I, on the other hand, left at 16, built my life alone, didn't need them, and that bothered them. The invoice wasn't a lesson, it was a punishment for being independent. Like a week after that, my father left me a voicemail. He sounded tired and said he wanted to talk to me, that things had gotten out of control and we needed to resolve this face to face. He didn't mention anything about the money or the invoice, just that he wanted to see me. I responded by text telling him that if he wanted to talk, we could meet at a public cafe. I wasn't going to go to his house and didn't want him coming to mine. We met on a Saturday afternoon at a Starbucks near my work. He arrived alone. My mother didn't come. He looked bad, honestly, like he hadn't slept in days. He sat down and for a few minutes said nothing, just stirred his coffee. Finally, he spoke and said he knew they had handled things badly, that the invoice had been my mother's idea. But he had agreed, and they hadn't anticipated that I would react by cutting off all contact with them. I asked him directly if they ever planned to give me $100,000, like my mother's email said. He was quiet for a long while and then said no. That she had said that in the moment to try to fix things, but it had never been the actual plan. I asked him then why. Why do all this? Why not just tell me from the beginning that I had to pay for my own wedding? My father said something about wanting me to learn not to depend on them, about how Catherine had turned out very dependent and spoiled, and they didn't want the same for me. I told him that was a bullshit excuse because I had never depended on them. I had left home at 16 precisely because they didn't give me anything. That the difference with Catherine wasn't that she was dependent, it was that they blatantly favored her and treated me like a burden. He started crying, like my father crying in the middle of a Starbucks, and said he regretted everything, that he hadn't realized how much damage all this had done to me over the years. He took out an envelope and said there was a check for $34,445.89, that he wanted to give it back to me, that he didn't want my money. I told him I didn't want it, that the money didn't matter anymore, that what mattered was that after 28 years he was finally admitting they had treated me differently than Catherine. I told him I needed time, that maybe someday we could have some kind of relationship, but it wasn't going to be soon. That I wasn't going to forgive this easily just because now he was crying and saying the right things. He left the cafe, leaving the envelope on the table. I didn't take it. I let it stay there when I left. It's been like 6 months since the wedding. I haven't talked to my parents since that day at the cafe. Catherine blocked me on everything after. I didn't respond to any of her messages. My uncle writes me from time to time to see how I'm doing. And that's something good that came out of all this. Like I finally have a relative who understands. Christopher has been incredible through all this. He's never made me feel guilty about the decision to cut contact. He just supports me and reminds me I made the right decision. Sometimes I feel guilty, like when it's my mother's birthday or Thanksgiving and I know they're expecting me to show up or call. But then I remember the invoice. A lifetime of feeling less than. Every time my achievements didn't matter, but Catherine's were celebrated, and I know I'm better off without them in my life. Maybe someday things will change. I don't know. But for now, I'm focused on building my own family with Christopher. One where love doesn't come with conditions or hidden invoices.